All right. Welcome, everyone. This is Stephanie with Integrous Women. I am so excited. This is like a personal dream of mine because I am a big fan of both of these beautiful women here with us today, Jackie Stavros and Sherry Torres. They are the co-authors of this book, Conversations Worth Having, which I have read multiple times. I've purchased multiple copies to give out to friends and some of our community members, because I probably gave you a couple copies. Very, very excited to have you both on here. How are you both doing today?
Wonderful.
Fabulous.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you for your energy around the book.
Yeah.
Yes.
And for inviting us to be part of this. We are also excited to be here.
Yay. It is so great. I am completely new to the appreciative inquiry world. I think I started last year. Around last year. And so I think the first exposure I had was also in reading this book, which actually all the big theories and things and the kind of complex knowledge and reading this simplified it for me and was so applicable, which is what I love. So why don't you share with everyone a little bit about both of you and for each of you, and then a little bit about this book and where this journey started.
Wow. Well, for my background is today I'm a professor at Lawrence Technological University, and our motto in our College of Business and IT is theory and practice. And I also do a lot of consulting and training and speaking in the area of appreciative inquiry. So where it started for me is actually with Sherry. We met right around after, I want to say, 9/11, and we were in Washington, D.C. area, and we were having this conversation. We had just met each other for the first time, and we were talking about appreciative inquiry, what it meant, and how applicable the principles of appreciative inquiry are to just daily living. And we just had a great friendship, and we wrote our first book, Dynamic Relationships, Unleashing the Power of Appreciative Inquiry in Daily Living. And I will tell you that it took about 15 years for us to figure out that how you breathe and how you interact is in your conversations. Imagine life with no conversations in your head and no conversations with each other. So after dynamic relationships, we thought we were doing dynamic relationships too, because the book was doing well, and we had given a proposal to our editor, and he put us up for a challenge saying that Jackie and Sherry, you are subject matter experts. What if you wrote a book around appreciative inquiry and brought it in a different way? And maybe I'll let Sherry take over the storytelling. But that's how we came up with Conversations Worth Having, was through an amazing editor who worked really hard to say, just two practices, just two practices. What are the stories? Keep it simple. So I'd say that's my version of how we ended up where we are today. Sherry?
Well, I kind of backed into appreciative inquiry through outdoor experiential learning, and an ex-business partner of mine and I designed and patented a portable low ropes course, and wanted to teach people how to facilitate the way we did, which was from an appreciative perspective, but we did not know that. And we didn't have an explicit model for how to do that. And when we got introduced to appreciative inquiry, both of us were like, oh my goodness, here is the explicit model, and here's all the research behind it. And we immediately integrated it into our training, and people got it. So for David David Cooper writer, had been able to make the concepts of focusing on what works and growing what works very explicit, and the research behind that very explicit. What was not explicit was, how do you actually then do that in your life? And so initially the 4Ds were developed because people wanted to know, how do we bring this into an organization? And when Jackie and I did our first book, AI was equated with the 4D process. And so we wanted to bring appreciative inquiry to the general public. And so we we tried doing that by putting it into the 4D process, which was awkward, but we didn't know how else to do that. And when we went to do the rewrite on dynamic relationships, we realized we weren't even teaching it that way anymore ourselves. But it took Steve Persante, our editor, to keep pushing back on us, because we had 4 practices initially, and he's like, nobody will do 4 practices. If you can get it to 1, that would be great, but no more than 2. And he said, if you can come up with some sort of a 2x2 that will help people understand what you're doing. And conversations didn't fall out until we were like way into the book. It was, it was like stumbling upon, because we kept trying to make it about relationships, because dynamic relationships, it's all about creating relationships with appreciative inquiry. And eventually, after a while, we were like, oh no, it's all about conversation. And it's like light bulbs went on for us.
Yes, the light bulb moment.
Yes.
Do you mind sharing, thank you for sharing the background story behind it. I think it's important to kind of know how you both even got into this work. But do you mind defining simply, because there's many people who are not even familiar with what appreciative inquiry is. So how would you define that to someone who's brand new looking in?
I would say that appreciative inquiry is about finding out the best in a system of 1, which is you, a system of 2, a system of hundreds, and the best of what was, what is, and what might be. And it happens through and in your conversations. Sherry, would you add anything?
Yeah, I would add that if you break the 2 words down, to appreciate is to add value or to value something. And inquiry is all about asking questions. So it's, now how do we have conversations and inquire into what will add value or what is of value? And that, if you define it that way, it takes the focus off of what so many people think is just talking about the positive. And it's not. It's talking about what's going to add value or is of value. And sometimes that's hard stuff.
Yeah. And that's what I actually like that you said that, because a lot of people, when you frame it, oh, it's just positive, or we talk a lot about positive psychology where it's, oh, we're just looking at the positive. But I like that you added that piece. And what I love about the book is the different case studies and the actual tangible experiences that you've had and that others have shared with you on what actually works. Especially, what I personally love for this is when I have quote unquote confrontations with people, which I've learned not to use that word because it's a big scary word for me. And instead it's just a conversation. We're just going to get to know each other and we're going to talk about a specific point or a challenge that both people are having. And I love, this book was a breakthrough for me, both personally and for business, on how to actually have those productive engagements on more challenging, subject matters, we'll say.
Oh, nice.
So tell us a little bit, so the creation of Conversations Worth Having, and then you put it in a module for Integrous women. Tell us a little bit of the high level, what are some of the outcomes you're hoping some of the members will have and some of our community will be able to learn, both from this conversation and from watching the module?
I would say at the high level, the module gives you an opportunity to learn three really basic core practices. 2 of them are for conversations. The first one, however, is to really practice coming from a mindset where you can connect and where you can access the best of who you are. And often when we get in those confrontational situations that you just described, we go to a place of trying to protect ourselves or being afraid of what might happen. And that takes us out of our being able to access our full neural thinking and feeling connections to people. And so the first couple modules are about appreciative inquiry and what's going on neurophysiologically for you, and how do you make sure that you are able to be in a place where you can come into a conversation worth having. And then we talk about the two basic practices of positive framing and generative questions. And if you use those, you can have a conversation worth having anytime, anywhere, and no matter what the situation is. And then finally, we bring those two practices to two business situations. One is giving and receiving feedback, and the other is around having strategic conversations.
Beautiful. Do you mind defining when you say positive framing and generative questions? Give us a high level. What does that mean?
So I'll start with those two practices. So positive framing is normally when people come in a situation, anytime, anywhere, any situation, as Sherry said, that they come to a situation with a problem or a challenge, and we ask them to do, for positive framing, we ask them to flip it to the positive opposite. And for example, let's say absenteeism is a problem at work. Well, the positive opposite of absenteeism would be people are coming to work on time, and that's the opposite. But what we really want to have a conversation about when we're framing it is, why is this such a great place to come to work for? Why do we love coming to work? Why do we want to show up? And we're really we're talking about the framing that if attendance is at an all-time high, the outcome is people love coming here and working here and being here. So positive framing is one of the practices. The second one is generative questions. And generative questions are questions that you and I don't know the answer to. We lean into, we're excited, we're curious. It comes up with new images, new actions. So it's generating energy and momentum forward. So those two practices of positive framing and generative questions are critical. And I will tell you, we get asked, well, which one do you do first? And it really doesn't matter because they kind of come together. So if you really learn the practice of generative questions, you're automatically doing this flipping in the positive framing. And if you have time to step back and think about a conversation you want to have coming up, Stephanie, that you can think about the frame and you're asking generative questions to get you there.
Can you give us some examples of generative questions? So in that scenario of absenteeism, what might a generative question look like?
Well, if let's see, if you were talking with somebody about the fact that they were absent a lot, you might say, tell me about a time when you came to work and you absolutely loved it. You had one of the best days at work. What was that like for you? And then let them tell their story, listen, and ask questions that help deepen it, like, what did you value about yourself? What did you value about your colleagues, the place of work? And you might ask a follow-up question that was something like, what if every day was like that for all of us? What would that be like? Oh, that would be awesome. I would come even when I was sick. What could we do to create that? So you're inviting a conversation about what you want instead of what you don't want.
And generative questions like deepen understanding, share multiple perspectives, figure out a pathway forward. And they end up strengthening relationships.
And what I like is the simple, the three-step process of name it, flip it, and frame it. I have already used that with so many business partners and collaborative partners of mine when we're having multiple. I'm like, all right, guys, it's super simple. We're going to name the challenge, the positive reframe of flipping it, and then just framing that situation. So tell us a little bit more of that three-step process. We're kind of talking about it with the positive reframe and the generative questions, but I think that is the easiest takeaway for everyone listening to this conversation right now and who's going to take the time to go through your module and hopefully buy your book and read it. But to me, that was the biggest most applicable thing that we can all be going out and doing, and that's simple to remember in all of those key moments?
Sure. Let's see. Probably it's easier to share, flip it, and frame it within the context of a story. And so let me share a story about, it's in our book, but it's a story about a young man who was an outdoor experiential educator, facilitator, and he was working with Indigenous tribes in Canada, and he was focused on trying to help young men who were in gangs, and using outdoor experiential education to teach them leadership and teamwork. And his frame for these young men was that they were that they had no leadership skills, basically, that they were going nowhere in life, that they had a bad attitude, negative attitude about things, and that if they didn't turn their lives around, they were headed towards a path of an early death, most likely. And so because of that frame, when he was working with them on activities, he was always pointing out what they were doing wrong and then telling them what they needed to do, which of course never works. And he ended up buying several of our portable low ropes course and taking our training, which by that time appreciative inquiry had been woven into it. And in the middle of the training, he was like, oh my goodness, I have this negative frame, this problem-oriented frame for these kids. And he flipped it to, so if these young men, for him, the positive opposite was they have leadership skills and teamwork, and they're using them for good. And what ended up happening is, as soon as he flipped his own frame and got them back on activities and started to watch from that perspective, he realized, wait a minute, they are doing things that are teamwork oriented, and they are taking leadership steps. And so little by little, he would ask questions about, how did you succeed at that? And what did you do? And he even talked about, how their leadership and teamwork showed up in their gang activities. And once they were acknowledged for that, they ended up having conversations around, how might we use those same skills to help us, to help our neighbors, to help our communities? And he had incredible success with them, simply by naming it, flipping it, and then framing it in a way that allowed their strengths to come forward.
I love that story. Thank you for resharing it for all of us. What comes to mind too, as you're sharing that particular story, is even just the power for all of us to have a belief in someone, to believe in the positive of someone. We see that a lot in parenting. It's like, well, if you really think your kid's a bad kid, he's going to show you all those bad qualities. But if you're really believing the best in them, you're going to see the best come out. Or, I mean, in marriages, and there's what I love about this though now is that, especially with the work I do in mental health, there's so much science to back this up.
Yes.
And that's what I really, to lack of better terms, appreciate about appreciative inquiry, is there's so much evidence and research behind actually proving that this is true. When we can have that almost like a new lens, like a new pair of sunglasses that we get to wear in the world, or glasses, because you're wearing some, just comes to mind.
And it's its own self-fulfilling reinforcement too. The more you do it, the more you're like, oh my goodness, this really works. Oh, when you do it more, and it's very rewarding work.
And Jackie, I know in the book you share, and I actually had the honor of getting to talk with your daughter, but you share some stories about, and that's what I love about this work, is it's not just in the professional world, but also in a personal world. Do you mind sharing a little bit? Because I got your daughter's perspective on this, which was awesome.
sure.
I got to hear it from her firsthand.
I'll give you Allie's perspective, and then you can tell me if our perspectives are similar. So think about a situation. It was about 6 years ago. Allie was 12 or 13 at the time, and my son Adam was 10. And my husband was diagnosed with a stage 4 cancer. And right away, you go negative deficit spiral, stage 4, he's going to die. And, you know, the doctor began to say, you know, there's some cures for stage 4 cancer. And it was it was the day before his 46th birthday. And I remember driving home, trying to figure out how am I going to tell a 10 and a 12-year-old why their dad hasn't been home in 10 days and that he's not going to be home for a few more weeks, hopefully. And at the time, I framed it. I knew how I was going to ask questions. And when I walked in the door, the first thing out of Allie's mouth was, is dad going to die? And as a parent, my instinct was, I wanted to say he was going to be okay. But what came out of my mouth was the truth. We are all going to die. That's not the answer she wanted to hear, but it wasn't a lie. And I wasn't going to tell her dad was going to be okay because I did not know. So when you take a problem that hits at the core of your heart, you know, the positive opposite is he's going to live. But we didn't want to have conversations around there. The generative questions was to have conversations with my kids around well-being. What is this place going to look like when I get dad home from the hospital? Think about a time of your peak experience. What is the favorite thing to do with your father? So they were very generative conversations, while I couldn't promise how the story would end up. And the good news is Paul is fine. He's been in remission. And I don't know if Allie told you this part, but when I brought Paul home after being gone almost a month, within 4 days he had a relapse, and I had to take him back to the hospital. And I remember Adam was 10 saying to Allie, is dad gonna die? And she looked at him and said, Adam, we're all gonna die. So when you look at a 12 and a 10-year-old talking to each other, you know, and for her interpretation is, we just have to be more positive about this, Adam. And this, so just to watch what my children went through at a very young age is appreciative inquiry. Yes, they will give your kids positive mental attitudes, but they will make your kids resilient. And bad things are going to happen to your kids. You cannot control bad things, but they're going to come out the other end thriving and flourishing and more resilient because of these kind of conversations worth having.
I think it's just absolutely beautiful, and you're completely right. And it's, especially, we have a lot of moms in our community, so to hear that story I think is so profound, because it really is, when we look to our parents for the answers. And it's what I love about just the work of AI is almost bringing it back and reminding, well, we all have this answer inside of us, and to just learn to ask those right questions, to get that, to draw that knowledge out, is powerful. I know with Integrous Women, we use this work in Guatemala with the young teens. And a lot of it just is, like I said, reminding them that we have the answers. It's just about coming with the right questions. But I think your experience, and to have talked to your daughter in that sense, was just it's beautiful just to see even just the full loop of it, and how just to see what an amazing and strong young woman she is. How old is she? She's like early 20s.
She just turned 21 last month.
Just turned 21. Yes.
She is an amazing young woman.
Yes. And really, and as she was talking, I was like, wow, it's like talking to your mom. Like, that's amazing. Here, like, she's asking me questions, and I'm just like, I'm going to write down these questions you're asking me, by the way, because they're so amazing and profound.
She's been practicing them and that's the key, is practice.
So it's beautiful. Persistence as well. Let's talk, stories are amazing. And I think this is a great way for all of us to be learning through these experiences. So thank you. Let's go kind of deeper into, so we did the generative questions, positive reframing. We talked about name it, flip it, frame it. Very simple things that we can all be doing. Let's talk specifically about who you're working with this type of work. And because you've been doing this for a good amount of time now, what are some of the common questions that you're getting, or maybe even some challenges that people are facing as they're going out into the quote unquote real world and putting this practice to the test? What's coming up for you?
So in work that we're doing with clients, or the work I'm doing with clients, people read the book, or I'll come in and I'll do a training, and they're like, "Oh, this is great! This is so simple." And then they get in the middle of a tough conversation, and they're like, "I don't know how to do this." And so I think that awareness from people is absolutely the case. It really is simple. And I think the key is when we get in a place where we feel like, I don't know how to do this, it means we are in a protect place in the brain. We're back trying to protect ourselves in some way. We're either afraid we're going to do it wrong, and that's really a time to start, talking within yourself to get yourself back into a place of connection and openness. So to pause, breathe, and really get curious about yourself and the other person. And as soon as you do that, things open back up. So it really, I think when we are in a place of where we have access to the whole brain, it is not only simple, it's also easy. And so it's that when it feels really hard, stop and take a breath and recognize, oh, I probably am afraid here, or I probably feel threatened or defensive. And the other thing that we're finding with the people that we're training, because we also have a training certification program, and we're finding with that group of people, their excitement about all the different places that they can take it in their work, whether it's in education, counseling, healthcare, social services. It's kind of like the sky's the limit, because conversation is the way everybody gets stuff done. Jackie, what have you found?
I would say, adding on to Sherry, I found everything that Sherry has said, and probably one of our favorite interviews that we did a year ago really wasn't an interview. We got the opportunity to write something for Forbes magazine, and it was right around the time of the Kavanaugh hearing. And I remember when Sherry and I finished this interview write-up and we sent it off to Forbes, we had no idea if they would ever publish our story or our interview. And it was Wednesday, and by Friday, I remember our phones and our texts blowing up, and we were in Forbes because the editor, Roger Duncan, said, what happened to civility? What happened to respect? What happened to it's okay to be different? Think of the Ellen DeGeneres show that was on last week about being kind even if you're different. That really struck a chord of the importance of learning how to do this, so we create environments that work for all, even if we're very different. And the one thing we wrote at the end of that article was the importance of having a do-over conversation. You walk away from your boss or your colleague and you're like, oh, I wish I could do that over again. And being able to show how these practices would work when you have what I like to call the moral courage to say, hey, let's have a do-over conversation.
And I think that's easy and something, once again, applicable for everyone. And I love, Sherry, that the mindfulness in the moment, oh my gosh. That in and of itself, though, to remember to breathe, even though we do it all the time, but just to step back and to have that moment of pause.
Yeah.
Oh, I think it sounds easier than done, but definitely with more practice, I think we can get in the use of it. I'm curious. So your trainer sounds like you're hitting so many different sectors. Is there a particular sector like education, social services? You mentioned a lot of them that you're particularly really excited about to see this work being done in.
Yeah, I think there's two. One is, and we're here today with you, we realized in July we want to hit the women. How important it is to do this with women and also with youth. Because if we could teach these types of conversations when people are younger and they start to grow through life with this, I actually think a lot of the issues that we're dealing with out there, violence and suicide and everything, that people will have different coping mechanisms. And the environment would be very different if people know what they think, what they say, and what they do does matter.
That is, you are speaking my language, youth and kids. Oh my gosh, yes. Why women? Just out of curiosity, or what's particularly exciting to you when you say women as a whole? What's the hope? What's the vision?
Um, I think because I'd like to see women more assertive, more comfortable, more confident. I mean, I work at a university, and I deal a lot with young women, and just getting them to a place that they're comfortable in conversations, and the efficacy of having conversations in the workplace, and being able to ask for things, and be able to give a position, and be, I think of that book by Sheryl Sandberg, Lean In. I think Conversations Worth Having helps you lean in for everybody into a conversation. What do you think, Sherry?
Wow.
I also think that the realm of conversation is a more feminine energy field. And we actually, in our trainings, they have been predominantly women that are in them. And we asked at our last training, there was one man in it, and we asked him, why is there only one of you here?
Wow.
And he said, well, I actually noticed that, and I've given it some thought. And he said probably that men don't want to be told how to have a conversation. They don't want to be told what to say. And that there's the potential for it feeling like this is what my wife is always trying to get me to do.
Oh, at least he gave raw, honest feedback.
Yes, I was like, how interesting is that? And I also think that the reason for women, I think this goes right along with what Jackie was saying, is that the conversations that many organizations, politicians, even at the local state level, that we're having are not, they are not generating the kind of inclusivity and creativity and engagement that is necessary for us to be successful going forward. I think as human beings, as societies, as organizations, we've got to figure out how to be more inclusive and how to have conversations that are going to make this world work for everybody, including the environment. And I think that women by nature, and this does not mean all women, and it doesn't mean men don't do it, but I think women by nature, because they are biologically, they are geared towards mothering. There's a biological to include and to come together to nurture. And conversation is a huge part of that. And so I think that it may be that the reason that women are drawn to this more is because it's hitting a chord for them in, yes, this speaks to me and it empowers me to create change.
No, that's very well said. I completely agree. It's what I've seen with this particular work is it almost gives a form of power when we are in those difficult spaces in male-dominated industries, to be the one that has that generative question that can almost tie everyone's. I'm someone who's very observant, so I normally sit back. I'm not like the first one in. I'm not the early adapter. I'm the one who kind of sits and listens. But to just pose or frame a question when you've sat and kind of listened to everyone's ideas, and you can sum it up, almost the ideas within a question, and then create additional innovation within that. I've just seen the power of having that one question in your pocket ready to go. And even just the space of learning to be more observant to those around us and to use this within it. So I think I completely agree with what you're saying, and I'm excited to see that that's actually something that you're strategically and consciously going after, these different markets. And Jackie, in the position that you're in, as far as being a teacher, like what an amazing space to have the young minds that you get to mold and shape and create that. And Sherry, I know you do so many international projects, so I'm excited to offline learn more about what you've been up to as well with the communities that you're already serving. So I'm excited to hear that the trainings are up and running. And towards the end, I'll definitely have you guys share a little bit more about your boot camps and how anyone listening can get involved and learn more, because I know I'm personally interested, and I'm sure I know so many more that are as well. Let's, yes, of course. I'd love to talk now about any action steps, or actually before actions. I'm seeing sometimes when people, kind of the assumption even that we talked about in the beginning, it's not just putting a positive slap on it and hey, you're off and running and forget the negative. I'm curious if throughout the years of doing this, and specifically now having launched your training program, do you feel that people are walking into this work with specific assumptions about what this is going to create, or any myths that you would like to debunk up front of people who, like, especially with that male feedback is powerful? Oh, this is just for women, because don't tell me how to have a conversation. I think it's important for us to know what are all these myths and assumptions up front that you would like to create space to debunk.
I think a myth that it's natural, but it's not natural. I think we're wired to problem solve, to go wrong. It's easy to go deficit based, and that these are two practices that have to be learned. And once you learn two practices and you understand the principles behind it, it becomes second nature. So it's not, I think some people have it in their DNA and it's natural. And when they find it, they're like, oh my gosh, this really resonates with me. We get a lot of people, this resonates. And then there's people that they got to practice this and they got to understand it better. So it's not as natural as it would seem.
Yeah, I think one of the big myths is that it's all about the positive, and it's not. Mm-hmm. And it's really all about the generative. What generates deeper connections and relationships? What broadens our knowledge and understanding between each other? What makes room for emergence, new possibilities, innovation, creativity? So I think that myth of we can't be negative is not true. It is really valuable to point out what's not working. It's just not valuable to spin cycle around what's not working.
That's great.
Great point.
Yeah.
Do you find it difficult when you are working with companies who really, they're so adamant about that one challenge, right? Like, you're going to come in and you're going to save us from this challenge. And do you find it that they're having difficulty, not that they're not focusing on it, but going into that positive space versus staying in the negative?
My experience is that as long as leadership realizes, oh, we are going to address the problem, but we don't have to be, negative and depleting our energy and wrong and bad. And I mean, most of them, they're excited. And they can see the release of energy and creativity among people in the room. So it's, as soon as people experience it, they get it in a heartbeat. If they're just trying to get it cognitively, it often is not. It's like, what? How are we going to address the problem that way? But I think it is a, and more the research that you mentioned about neuropsychology and positive psychology, more and more of that research is out there and reaching people in business, and they're beginning to understand we've got to do this differently.
Yeah. And I would imagine it's refreshing also to be in a space that is positive and energizing and almost so much heart in it, versus working, I'm sure, with so many other consultants who will drill to get to I mean, to get to the pit, essentially, there's nothing there.
Right.
So to make it life-giving versus this depletion, I think that's beautiful of a process.
Yeah.
What actions? So we've watched the module, we've learned these things. What are you hoping most of the people who are going to go through the module, or even just from listening to this conversation, will walk away with?
You know, I would like people to really be aware of their tone and direction of their conversations. So your tone should be appreciative, and your direction that you're moving in should be positive. But your human nature, you are going to have a negative tone at times, a stern tone. You're going to have a deficit spiral. But now that you've learned these practices, the question is, does it take you 30 seconds or 3 minutes, maybe 3 hours, to shift it to a conversation's worth having? And we explain in the book that critical conversations are worth having to a point. Affirmative, superficial conversations are maybe to a point. But at the end of the day, we want to get above that line into that quadrant where your conversations are appreciative, valuing in nature, and there's inquiry and just not talking at one another, but with each other.
Beautiful. Sherry, what would you like to add?
Well, in the workbook that goes along with the module, there are a number of activities that people can do to actually bring this work into their life. So I would love to see people trying those activities out. And I think if people trying them out are like everybody else that has tried them out, they will want to do more, because it just, as you know, it just has such a positive impact on your life and your well-being and your relationships and your ability to be successful. So I hope people will at least give it a try.
Beautiful. Anything else? Any final thoughts, things we didn't talk about that you would like to add?
I'd like to add that if you think about it this way, that all sorts of change within your minds and with others, all sorts of changes in conversations. So remember that just one conversation can be a pivotal change for the better, for the best for somebody.
Yeah, and don't forget those internal conversations, because we're often having the internal conversation even when we're also having an external conversation, and they are all important.
That is so important, especially in mental health. The little voices in our heads,
Yeah,
they're not crazy, they're all there.
exactly.
Definitely. I would love to create a space for you to share really quickly about the boot camp that you have. How can people get in contact with you? I'm going to be tagging your websites. I'll put a link to that. Well, I think the book you can also get through the website, but specifically the boot camps. We have a lot of trainers in our community, and I would love for them to learn about how they can get trained in conversations worth having.
Sure.
So if you send folks to our website, on the website we have a training page, and it gives some information about it and when to register. We offer our boot camps online as well as in person. We actually have a boot camp coming up starting the first week in November. So if anybody's interested, you can still sign up for that. And our Train the Trainer program is also, there's some information on the website about that as well. And the training, that just to briefly, in case anybody is interested in becoming a trainer, our training program is offered through the David L. Cooper Writer Center. So the certification comes from the center itself.
Yeah, so if you think about people are busy today on Eastern Standard Time. We made these during lunch hour. They're 1 hour each. If you miss one, you can, they're recorded, so you can catch up if you can't make one lunch, and even if you make it, you can watch it again. And it was really important to get the David L. Cooper Writer Center for Appreciative Inquiry. They're at Champlain College, so we actually do an on-ground one if you want to go to Vermont. Sherry, we're going to be having one in Asheville if you need to get somewhere warm in winter and in March. So, you know, we're trying to really get it out there so it's easily accessible for people.
Yeah.
I think
And
adding Orange County to your list of locations would be ideal if you want that warmth and sunshine and
that would be
ocean.
That would be
great. We
great.
would love to do that. And one other thing, that people can download a conversation toolkit for free off our website
Oh,
if they go. So
beautiful, beautiful. We'll make sure that they get all of that information. I want to thank both of you so much from the bottom of my heart. Both of you are amazing souls, integrous women through and through, for sure. And I look forward to having conversations worth having with everyone who's listened, everyone who's watching, and helping really to empower all of us to have that insight into actually our creating new conversations that flourish. Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie. And thank you for what you're doing with Integrous Women. And it was really exciting to be invited and to be part of this and put the modules together. So thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, it's very
Thank you.
exciting for you.